The evolution of Ian from 2000 to 2020. Ian was initiated when the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, or UMCES, faculty recognized that they were documenting ongoing environmental degradation, particularly in Chesapeake Bay, rather than using their great science to help solve environmental problems. So, in the 2000 UMCES strategic plan, the faculty called for a restructuring of scholarship into discovery, integration, application, and teaching, based on the seminal book, Scholarship Reconsidered, Priorities of the Professorate. This restructuring led to the concept of an integration and application network. The UMCES president, Don Bosch, went to the Maryland General Assembly to obtain funding for this initiative and created a new position, Vice President for Science Application. And this position was filled in 2002 by me. In the Ian initiation phase, an Ian website was created, and this website actually preceded the UMCES website. Symbols used for science communication were made available on the Ian website, which proved to be very popular. Ian hired a science integrator and a science communicator, and they began to produce science communication products with Chesapeake Bay and Maryland Coastal Bay scientists. In the Ian partnership phase, Ian started a long and productive partnership with the National Park Service. Ian began conducting assessments of the natural resources in the national parks in the National Capital Region. Ian began another enduring partnership with NOAA, conducting a national estuarine eutrophication assessment, and created an 8-year partnership called EcoCheck based at the Oxford Cooperative Laboratory. And this EcoCheck partnership began to produce the first Chesapeake Bay report cards. In this phase, Ian established the Annapolis Synthesis Center, which served as a precursor to the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center, or SSINC, based in Annapolis. Ian led the effort to synthesize lessons learned from 10 years of UMCES research on the effects of scale on enclosed experimental ecosystems, or mesocosms, resulting in the publication of a book. But dissatisfaction with the scientific publishing process led Ian to launch Ian Press. And Shifting Sands was the first Ian Press publication based on a synthesis of Maryland Coastal Bay science. In the Ian engagement phase, Ian expanded the number of embedded employees based at the Chesapeake Bay program. In addition, Ian helped with the successful bid to the National Science Foundation to establish SSINC in Annapolis. Ian's staff were even co-located with SSINC for 5 years until space considerations led to a relocation. Ian published its first ebook, Dancing with Dugongs, and began engaging with resource managers in the Pacific region to create report cards and reporting frameworks. In the Ian globalization phase, Ian began to facilitate workshops for the BELMONT Forum, an international consortium of science funding agencies that support transnational and transdisciplinary research. Ian also joined Future Earth Coast, part of Future Earth, an international scientific project that supports sustainability in the coastal zone. And Ian is a member of the globally distributed International Project Office of Future Earth Coast. Ian's also active in the International River Foundation, which champions integrated river basin management and sponsors annual river symposia and river prizes. Ian's staff also began to teach virtually on a global scale with courses in creating environmental report cards. In the Ian leadership phase, starting in 2020, Ian is initiating a 4-year transnational transdisciplinary project called Coast Card to integrate report cards with social network analysis and system dynamics models in Chesapeake Bay, Manila Bay, Tokyo Bay, and the Indian Goa Coast. Ian's also preparing a professional certificate using massive open online courses, or MOOCs, to be placed on the edX educational platform, launching in 2021. Ian's also expanding its dissemination of findings in the peer-reviewed literature. While this was a pretty brief description of the 20-year evolution of Ian, a much more complete picture of the story is available on the Ian portion of the UMCES website. There are over 900 blogs and 750 e-newsletter items and 550 e-press publications that provide a lot more detail. Embracing the human dimensions. Ian has developed social science skills over the past 5 years. For example, Ian staff are using social network analysis and causal loop diagramming to help look for connections between people, institutions, and the environment. Ian's increasing stakeholder participation, evolving from outreach and collaboration to co-production. Ian has embraced transdisciplinary science when dealing with complex environmental issues. Ian's combining societal issues with science questions to obtain an alignment. When you get the right people working on the right problem, following the right pathway, then you can co-produce integrated solutions. Ian's also using cultural consensus modeling to produce a shared vision to guide efforts. For example, Vanessa Vargas Wynn, the first PhD in the Mies Environment and Society Foundation, created a vision of Chesapeake Bay following interviews with dozens of people involved in bay restoration as part of her dissertation. This expansive view of Chesapeake Bay includes cultural aspects, things like fair and meaningful participation in environmental decision-making, environmental literacy, transparency and accountability, as well as citizen science programs. So these cultural aspects accompany the environmental goals like fishable and swimmable waters, sustainable practices and protection and restoration efforts. Grading ourselves. In the 2015 review of Ian, a major recommendation was to conduct evaluations of the effectiveness of the Ian process. So, Ian established a theory of change in which the features of the Ian team dynamics are aligned, specifically financial viability, functionality, capacity building, and staff happiness. With this internal alignment, then Ian staff can develop effective partner engagement. By working with good partners, Ian staff can magnify their social impacts through dissemination, teaching, and training. These social impacts, if they're successful, will lead to positive ecological outcomes. The Ian report cards are based on this theory of change. Introspective report cards assess the Ian team dynamics every other year, and they're used by Ian leadership to improve the practices to make Ian more functional. We don't share them beyond the Ian team. In contrast, the external report cards, which are produced annually, serve as brief annual reports that are publicly disseminated. External professional evaluators from the College of Exploration help with both of these assessments. So the self-reflection of Ian report cards has actually created new opportunities for Ian. For example, the Office of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia contracted Ian staff recently to conduct an assessment of the functionality of this office. A suite of indicators was created to assess the core goals of cohesive staff, credible science, resilient organization, relevance to stakeholders, and effective outreach. Surveys of staff and surveys of partners and managers were used along with other data to make this assessment of the Office of the Great Barrier Reef. In addition, the UMC's institutional assessment was conducted with indicators for institutional goals, operational effectiveness, and education, all as part of the Middle States Commission on Higher Education Self-Study. So, reflecting on this, the recommendation from the 2015 review calling for more evaluation actually resulted in some positive outcomes, enhancing the entire Ian enterprise.